Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Police Off the Cuff. Today, we're going to be discussing some new developments in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, a case that has now gripped the community and investigators we're in day 43. Federal investigators and the Pima County Sheriff's Office have now confirmed that they are analyzing additional images recovered from surveillance cameras in the area, potentially showing the individual or individuals believed to be connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. At the same time, investigators are turning to advanced forensic techniques, including investigative genetic genealogy, also known as IgG, in an effort to identify the person or persons responsible for this crime. And a quick reminder, if you're looking for real crime insight, not YouTube theories, this channel is different. I'm a retired NYPD sergeant, and on Police Off the Cuff, we analyze the way cops and prosecutors do, what matters, what doesn't, and what the internet gets wrong. If that's the perspective you want, subscribe now, because this isn't entertainment, it's experience. And in addition, folks, this show, we'd like to remind you, is sponsored by FanDuel on the Believe Network. So hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your cup of coffee, hold on to your service dog. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the Off the Cuff zone, the Police Off the Cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
You know, these new leads that the FBI is actually talking about, and they haven't disseminated any new photographs or any new video in regards to this. So I question how new it actually is. It's coming out, but how new is it? I don't know. Just as the new things we're hearing about the interview of the employees from that Mexican restaurant that Nancy Guthrie and her mom, Savannah Guthrie and her mom, Nancy, in October, filmed a scene for the NBC show, for the Today Show, at El Charro restaurant in Tucson, Arizona. Apparently a restaurant that the Guthrie family had been going to for their whole lives. And the restaurant employees and knew the whole family and had great things to say about them. But the FBI interviewed everyone to see a potential. Look, this is also investigation 101. And the fact we're just hearing about it now is a little, the FBI keeps things extremely close to the vest. And there's so many other investigative steps and investigative checklist things that undoubtedly the FBI has done, as well as the Pima County Sheriff's Office. But after 43 days, we, content creators on YouTube, and you, the audience out there, true crime followers, and just regular John Q citizens and Jane Q citizens, you want to know what the hell is going on here? Why is there not a break in this case? And we're asking the same thing. And every talking head from here to Timbuktu has weighed in on this case. And many of them, just about all of them, are baffled. No one has the answer. So hoping that maybe we could come up with an answer today, joining me is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, all-around good guy, attorney at law. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, good afternoon, Bill. Thank you for having me on today. Good to see you.
You know, Mike, you can hear, you travel around, you go to the gym, you go to school, you shop, you see your neighbors. When people ask about this case that really aren't plugged in, they're like, what the hell's going on with that case? How come she hasn't been recovered? How come there's been no arrest? Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, a lot of work has been done by the Pima County Sheriffs, probably also the state troopers in Arizona, and also the FBI, all doing their part. Now, there's been a lot of investigating going on over the past 6 weeks. And what is leaking out now is not brand new. Like the FBI just didn't start to investigate this case or interview these people, the day before yesterday, and then they released that information. No, this information, all these investigative techniques that they're using, as you say, investigating 101, they started that the moment the FBI hit the ground, and Pima hopefully was doing that earlier, and maybe even the state police were doing that earlier to help out. But it's coming out now, but it's brand new to the public. It's brand new to content creators. It's brand new to the communications like CNN and MSNBC and all these other places. It's new to them, but I would imagine that when they went to that Mexican restaurant, Charo's, to talk to people, they wanted to see, what had gone on at that point when she had done that. Does anybody remember anything untoward happening during the filming of that? Was there anybody acting suspiciously? So they interviewed as many people as they can, but they probably did that, I'm sure, probably within the first week of the investigation. It makes us a little bit nervous because we see a 6-week-long investigation, and we believe, since it was a kidnapping, that it would have been solved, like that, but it's not. And I tend to see it now, and many other people do, and I'm a cynic. I see it as more like now a homicide investigation. It's not a rescue, it's a recovery. But 6 weeks for a homicide investigation is not much. But as you say, the FBI keeps everything close to their vest. And when they do release something, it's significant. And when they hold something back, and they probably realize it's probably not worthy in terms of, it's just information they have, and it's not really relevant to the case. But I don't think people should be upset with the FBI, because that's the way they work, and they know what they're doing. So even though it's been 6 weeks, I think that the FBI is slowly building a case. Who knows how long it's going to take, but they are building a case.
Mike, I would want to know if, of course, if I was one of the investigators, which I frequently did with my detectives, we go into a restaurant. I want to know exactly who was working the day and the night of the shoot. Give me your entire employee roster. I want their date of birth. I want their home address. I want the cars, if you have what cars are registered to, which a lot of restaurant employees have to give that up because they're parking on site, and the restaurant owner wants to know whose car is where. I would want to know all of that information. And then you have a built-in investigative tool, and you say, oh, let me check this guy out. Oh, this guy did 2 years in prison, right away. A red flag pops. He becomes a person. I'm not going to use the term interest, but he becomes someone you want to look at further.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So again, all of these things are investigative checklist things. And the fact that because this case is moving along so slow, many of the broadcasts, including many of the content creators on YouTube, are just simply making shit up, to put it mildly, and we have to dissect what's true from what's false. And when we see something like this, specifically that Savannah Guthrie and her mom filmed an episode of the Today Show at El Charro restaurant. They didn't even want to name the restaurant. But so at El Charro restaurant in October, how is that breaking news? But it's breaking news now, right? Because it's coming out slow. And the FBI is, very slow to release things. So what hopes do we have in this case? That's the thumbnail for today's case, right? Photos and DNA. That is the biggest hope we have right now. And technologically, they're still probably trying to get photos from the cameras inside Nancy Guthrie's house. And they're using every technological and every scientific means to produce those photos. But if those photos aren't a slam dunk in helping to identify someone, if they're not good enough, where someone could look at a photo and say, I know that guy. Right. The FBI is not going to put it out there. We've seen that with the Boston Marathon bombing, where they were reluctant to put out the video of the Tsarnaev brothers before they were caught. So I think these photos have to be slam dunk good, or the FBI is not going to release them to the public. And let's not forget, to make an identification on a criminal is also a legal matter. So if someone says, "Oh, I recognize that's person so and so," you got to be careful because that has to be presented down the road in court as an identification procedure. How was he identified? You violated his civil rights. All of those things have to be taken into consideration, which many of the talking broadcasters out there, the content creators, and many even of the, we see some of these people on TV that have their own podcast, and they don't realize the law involved with some of this stuff. With this case, of course, and we praise Brian Enton. We love him as a reporter. He's boots on the ground there. But every day, you got to realize he's not coming up, or nor is other people boots on the ground coming up with new things in regards to this case. And everyone's chomping at the bit for something new. This is Brian Enton.
We know that the FBI has been able to obtain images from those additional cameras at Nancy's house. The issue is, though, they are not the full images and they're not videos. They are just the thumbnails. So every time that the cameras picked up motion, there was a thumbnail created, and that is what the FBI has. And what's sort of odd is around the time frame that Nancy went missing, all of those images are apparently missing. So they don't have those images from early morning hours of February 1st, but they may be making progress in terms of getting into the cameras now that they have these thumbnails. So overall, it does seem like good news. Also new, Henna, the sheriff was asked, do you think the suspect could strike again? And he responded, absolutely. This is in a new interview that came out yesterday, which was kind of a startling thing to hear him say, although he maintains that he believes that this crime was targeted. And then there's also the DNA. Remember, there was DNA found inside the house. We know they're continuing to try to analyze it. There's been issues with it because it's mixed DNA, which means it's multiple people's DNA combined into this one sample, which is an issue. I went to Arizona State University and spoke to a forensics professor there, specialist in DNA, knows it all. And she was explaining to me that even though the suspect had a balaclava on, a mask, the fact that his mouth wasn't covered could actually be a good thing when it comes to saliva. Listen to this. The fact that he wasn't wearing a mask over his mouth and nose, is that a very good thing?
It is a good thing, but knowing where he was at inside the home would be very difficult.
So just because he was in there breathing and spit was coming out,
we wouldn't know.
That doesn't tell us much about, they can't check the whole house.
They can look, but unless he spit a lot, they're not going to see a large quantity, and it's not going to fluoresce.
I just want to mention something. What's very, very interesting to me also, in the Gilgo Beach case with Rex Schumann, and we all saw his disgusting home in Massapequa, they said that there was DNA in that house from years ago, 12, 14. So when you think about that, recovering even current DNA is a needle in a haystack, unless you have a very specific location. And they may have that in this case because apparently she was kidnapped from her bed, right out of her bed, right? So, of course, the forensic scientists, the CSI people, I would hope, and I'm sure they did, concentrate on that room, on that bedroom for recovering DNA purposes. But another thing, complicated, that Pima County sheriffs ran this crime scene for a day or two. And if you listen to this sheriff and you have confidence in that guy, I think, maybe you should buy a bridge in Brooklyn. Mike.
Yeah, it would be excellent if we knew if she was actually taken from her bed, because that would show that the perpetrator actually went into the bedroom. If she had tried to answer the door and she was accosted in the hallway, there's a possibility, we don't know because about the cameras in the house, but there's a possibility that the perp never actually entered the bedroom. And so if you don't have a picture of that perp in the bedroom where you could say, oh, let's check out the headboard, because he might have been leaning over Nancy, grabbing her, taping her up, or putting something over her mouth so she couldn't scream, you could concentrate on the headboard area, the pillow area. But other than that, it's like you say, it's a shot in the dark. It's a one in a,
it's a needle in a haystack. It's absolutely
kind of
a needle in a haystack.
Makes it really difficult. So those pictures that they have would be great. But one of the other problems is, as I'm talking to you and reasoning this out, is they've also now released the house back to the family. And if anybody goes in there, it starts to clean and take some pledge and polish and stuff and starts cleaning at all, they're going to destroy perhaps whatever DNA could be in that bedroom. So it's one of those kind of cases where they do have some good information that they're not releasing. They do have some pictures, which we haven't seen yet, but you may get a lot of pictures. When I was just thinking, as you were talking earlier about the pictures, somebody might say, I know that guy, but they have to make a phone call. They have to actually notify the police and say, I know that guy. And then that guy, whoever it is, will be brought in, and then they would do a lineup. What happens if they can't, so there's a lot of steps involved in this that the public doesn't know about, or the public doesn't realize it because they're so used to watching, CSI shows or Law and Order where everything's done like that.
And they skip over that, or they skip over that boring part because that's the law. That's boring. Skip over that. They don't need to know that. First from the chat at Sharon Chuvala 8633. Would the FBI tell the restaurant workers not to confirm that they were there? Absolutely. They would tell them that 100%. They wouldn't want the restaurant workers to tell the community, or perhaps tell someone and raise someone else up that the FBI is out there talking and questioning people. Absolutely. So I'm just getting to the points too. If there's anything new in this case, okay, these photos that allegedly the FBI recovered that they haven't released yet. I believe that they're still digging. They're still digging through the electronics in this case, and they just haven't come upon the photo, the smoking gun photo that's going to help identify someone. And then, of course, we always have now, which is the smoking gun of the 21st century, the investigative genetic genealogical identification of the perp. But then again, that sample is coming from an allegedly commingled DNA sample, which could take months or a year to come, to build that family tree, that genetic genealogical family tree. Let me go back to Brian Enton with this scientist from Arizona State University.
So overall, Hannah, there would have to be a lot of saliva for it really to make a difference. Hannah?
Brian, earlier I mentioned how many fans you have out there who've been following your excellent coverage. One of those people we're learning is Brian Kohberger, who has been following your coverage that, for viewers who may have forgotten, the Idaho quadruple murders. He is
this is just stupid. That doesn't I don't want to cover that. That doesn't say anything about this case. We love Brian Enton too, but that point of it. So yes, showing the photos, the FBI probably won't. They probably won't release them unless at some point, and it appears that they have hit a dead end right now, that they're not on anything so solid that they would consider we got a person of interest, or we're going in this direction, we're going in that direction. I think that it's they're struggling right now. I really believe that. I believe they're struggling. I don't think it's a cold case yet, but because no one in the law enforcement business can say, and Mike said this, the reality of it, that this is probably a homicide investigation, that this is day 43. Nancy Guthrie's 84 years old, and they haven't recovered her at this point. So more than likely, this is a homicide investigation, and it has to be treated as such. But I would never say a homicide investigation after 43 days is a cold case. I would never, ever say that. So when you hear the media types all saying that, and they're dying to say, is it cold? I want to call this a cold case. No, it's not. It's not a cold case, all right? We're working every day on leads. Every day people are calling in and giving us leads. We are not coming in every day to work and twiddling our thumbs. We are actively working this case. And once they come into work and there's nothing to do, that's when it becomes a cold case. When you have nothing to do because you just hit a brick wall, you hit a dead end. That is when, my friends, you can define it as a cold case. Mike.
Yeah, this is far away from being a cold case. People like to hear we heard about in the Kohberger case because they're like, The local police can't handle this. The FBI should take jurisdiction. The FBI didn't have jurisdiction in the case to take it in the first place. They're helping. Same thing here, Pima County. The only time the U.S. Attorney's Office would get involved is, and the FBI would take over perhaps, if they believe, it's gone through across state lines and other federal offenses like that. But other than that, there's no way this is a cold case. If we're still here talking about this in July, maybe. But with investigative genetic genealogy and people trying to get a better sample of DNA or get better analytics of DNA, because we know DNA ever since, I'll say September 11, 2001, investigative genetics has gone amazingly fast compared to what happened before. It's just remarkable. When you started out years ago, you needed blood. Nothing else would work. You couldn't have saliva or anything, sweat, skin cells. And that's how it started. And here we are today, being able to build family trees and all kinds of amazing things with just a little bit of skin cells and things like that. So therefore, there's that possibility. Science may solve it, but we also want someone to come forward, because it'd be a lot faster if someone came forward, dropped a dime, as we used to say, on a possible perp, let the FBI know who that person may look like. I'm in favor of releasing just a few more images. We've got a little bit, but not everything the FBI has, but just a few, just to see, just to nibble. Maybe there's somebody will say, I know that, rather than release, say, maybe they have 500 images. I don't know, but don't release them all. Release one or two of the best and just see what you can get. They got to stir the pot. They got to beat the bushes. They got to go out there and keep people interested, because this is definitely not anywhere near a cold case.
Absolutely, Mike. At Daryl7777 from the chat, Sergeant Bill, do you guys think that it's quite possible that the FBI have one or more suspects they are currently tracking and waiting for them to say or do something incriminating to surreptitiously get DNA? You can surreptitiously collect anyone's DNA without even any suspicion at all. Because once someone, say, drinks from a cup, drinks from a bottle, blows their nose into I don't want to collect it that way, it's disgusting, but and they throw it out, they have no more rights to that property that they just threw out. So a law enforcement agency can scoop up the cup, scoop up that bottle, and process it for DNA if they so please. But they don't need any standard of proof to, and I love that word, surreptitiously. It's sort of hard to say. And I used to say, when I used to teach college, the kids couldn't understand surreptitiously, and what they could understand, I would say, it means on the DL. And then good. Oh, on the down low. Okay, Professor Cannon, I get it. They scoop it up on the down low. Yeah, that's what surreptitiously means. Folks, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, like us, share us, and make lots of comments. That helps our show grow. It hits the algorithm. We get shared all over the world, all over YouTube, and we appreciate that. If you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can become an off-the-cuffer by joining the Police Off the Cuff site on YouTube. When we talk about investigative genetic genealogy, I would say the queen, because she is a female, the queen of investigative genetic genealogy worldwide is CeCe Moore. In fact, I tried to get her on the show and she blew me off. And so if she's listening, CeCe, my show has grown since I asked you to come on. So if you would ever come on, the offer's still out there. But I guess I'm not big enough for a TV show, so she wouldn't come on my show. Anyway, CeCe Moore is the queen of investigative genetic genealogy. And she was interviewed in regards to this case by News Nation, of course, of all people. Because hang on one second, I'll get it right up on the screen. So this is CeCe Moore, and she has some of the most famous cases in the use of investigative genetic genealogy, and hopefully she can help when it comes to this case.
Excited about getting to talk about these things more deeply with you, because you always have great questions, but we're always rushed when it's live. So this is a great opportunity.
I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to diving deeper as well. And specifically, it's interesting. You've said that mixed samples are common, especially when a victim fights back. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I didn't have any experience with law enforcement until almost 8 years ago now, when I joined forces with Parabon to help law enforcement solve a lot of these types of cases. So it was very eye-opening to me to learn about these forensic samples that they have to deal with and how challenging they can be. So it is not at all unusual to have a blood mixture at a crime scene. And that is relatively straightforward to work with. If it's the victim and a unknown male perpetrator, that is relatively straightforward. But I've also learned a lot about transfer DNA and how you can have complex mixtures, how easy it is for us to leave our DNA everywhere we go. And that means that as the technology has gotten more sensitive, the ability to detect more DNA profiles has increased. And so in some ways, it almost makes the work harder because you're not just pulling that primary DNA, you're also often pulling multiple people's DNA that may or may not have been there at the same time. We also see, of course, in sexual assaults, it's really common that you've got a mixture of bodily fluid. And unfortunately, I work a lot of sexual assault cases, so that's not at all unusual either. And so it's not something that is insurmountable. There are ways for our incredibly brilliant bioinformatics scientists to deconvolute those mixtures. That's what it's called when you are trying to separate out those DNA profiles. And so we've had a lot of success. A lot of our cases that we've been able to help law enforcement identify a perpetrator or Jane or John Doe, we have dealt with mixtures. And so when I first heard there was a mixture in the Guthrie case, that didn't automatically concern me, because in some cases that can be positive because it can give you a better idea that you're actually working with the DNA from the perpetrator versus somebody's DNA that was there for another reason. As time has gone on, I've realized, this has to be a more complex mixture and much more difficult. Now, our scientists can work down to about 40%, meaning the person you're trying to identify needs to be at least 40% of that mixture. This is completely different from working with mixtures for CODIS profiles, right? So they have completely different standards, but for SNP profiles that we use for genetic genealogy, we typically need that person to be about 40%. So if you've got multiple people in that mixture, how do you even know which one is the person that needs to be identified to solve that case? So it's definitely challenging, but as I said, not necessarily insurmountable.
And I know that the latest timeline we're hearing is even potentially a year in order to separate this DNA and even begin to run that analysis. Does that sound right to you? And what went through your mind when you heard that kind of timeline?
Well, the way I interpret that means that they don't right now currently have the ability to separate it, and they're hoping that the science is going to advance. So when I first started in genetic genealogy, a lot of people kind of rolled their eyes at us and laughed at us, and people didn't take us very seriously. It was just a genealogy thing, right? And we built this incredibly powerful tool for human identification under the radar. Now that it is helping to solve cases and identify violent criminals, there's a lot more attention to it. And so for the last 7.5 years, we've seen the science behind genetic genealogy, the foundation for genetic genealogy, creating that SNP profile successfully, grow leaps and bounds, because now there are scientists, both academic scientists and forensic scientists, very interested in creating these viable SNP profiles. And so when I hear that they think it might be a year, that says to me that whatever software or whatever, their bioinformatics scientists have at this moment is not successful in deconvoluting that sample. So they are hoping that things will change in the coming months or years. That's not an unreasonable expectation because of the attention that is now being paid to what we're doing. And so, we've seen for decades with CODIS profiles that they've been creating techniques and software packages and ways to separate out or deconvolute those profiles. So,
as much as even what she's saying is very complicated, she has a way of explaining it to the layman where it is understandable. And she uses the term SNP because SNP stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. And you're like, oh my God, just try to say those words. And RFLP, restriction fragment length polymorphism. So all of these words in themselves can just turn people off, but she has a way of explaining it to the non-scientists, which certainly I am a non-scientist. Certainly you are, Mike, and most of our audience are non-scientists. So how many of us folks, including you and I, listening right now, are fully understanding what CC Moore is telling us right now, Mike?
Yeah, we get the idea, we get the general drift, and what she had said about the technology is that the labs right now they're having issues with trying to separate the DNA, and once you separate it completely, you have to have about at least maybe 40% of that DNA has to be the perpetrator's DNA, so you could classify it, I guess, properly and move on with your investigation. We understand that the technology is moving forward. It's going to take a while, she said, from what she understands, because she understands the science, is that they're having issues with that. And the science is moving very quickly. And perhaps maybe in a year, the technology will advance to the point where they can do something better. And maybe you have a 20% total perpetrator DNA sample and the other 80% is made up of other people. That would be better. But I'm sitting there concentrating on what she's saying. And, my head is spinning because there is so much old and new information she's putting out there. And the technology is moving so quickly that it always gives you hope for every case, active or cold, that you will get a resolution to the case.
Well, Mike, we learned so much by covering the Gilgo Beach serial killer case, which still, when that goes to trial, we're going to learn a lot more, because we found out that they had recently, while we were covering that case, discovered another murder from 1993 that they recovered Rex Schuman's DNA on the victim's body. And I believe it was a hair. It was like mitochondrial DNA, a hair on her body. And I was like, oh my God, 1993, that, I think Rex Schumann now is like 62 years old. So if you do the math, you see what age, when did he start becoming a serial killer? And that put him pretty damn young, and we don't even know if that was his first murder. So people like CC Moore are unbelievable. And I love listening to it. And I love learning about this, because this is like, I think this is, a Nobel Prize. It should be. Whoever has the most advancement in this science, who I know Parabon Labs, they talk about Othram Labs. Mm-hmm. These people deserve like a Nobel Peace Prize for the science, for the advances in the science that has enabled law enforcement to capture some of the worst to knock out drop dead evidence that is irrefutable. Mike.
Yeah, there's nothing better to me and nothing more satisfying is if I'm looking at something crime and justice related on the internet and I find a video of a newscast from somewhere around the country where someone who had done a murder back in the 1980s is now been identified and caught and pled guilty, or from the 1960s or from the 1990s. That, to me, that's very, very satisfying, because justice delayed is justice denied, but at least there's justice for the family and for the victim. And that's a heartwarming thing. And that's a promising thing. That's a wonderful thing, that somebody who believed that they had gotten away with a murder for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years can finally be brought to justice. That is a great public good. Absolutely.
Unbelievable. Let me go play a little bit more CC Moore and just how important the investigative genetic genealogy is to this case. And that's one of the reasons that you can never, ever say die. Never, ever give up on an investigation, especially when there's DNA involved. We're hearing cases, someone just got arrested from a murder from 43 years ago. And it's just like, so look, one of the things, and if you didn't know this, I'm going to teach it to you right now. There is no statute of limitations for murder, for homicide. So you could be, 95 years old going to collect your SSI check. if you don't have direct deposit. And
Right.
the police can come up behind you and say, you so-and-so, you're under arrest for the blah, 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 law enforcement. And then they like as if they read your Miranda right on the scene, but that's what TV tells us. So at any time, someone that did a murder can be arrested because there is no statute of limitations. And investigative genetic genealogy makes this all possible. Back to CC Moore for a few more minutes.
We're kind of seeing that same thing now with SNP profiling, but we're starting from almost the beginning because it's still relatively new compared to the other type of DNA profile they've been working with for decades.
Wow. So you think it's likely and possible that the technology simply does not even exist. The software simply doesn't exist to deconvolute this sample that was found in the Guthrie home.
At least not that DNA Labs International and the FBI has access to. That's not to say that there isn't somebody out there who is developing something or has developed something that would work. So hopefully this will spur on even more innovation and giving new people, new scientists, the opportunity to present maybe something they've been working on. So Dr. Janet Cady at Parabon had a grant from, I think it was NIH, to study mixtures with whole genome sequencing. With the mixtures we've had success with, we've been using microarray. So those are two different platforms for analyzing the DNA. And so when we get a mixture, we automatically go to microarray because that works for us, and it's always worked for us. Some of the companies that are working with law enforcement and genetic genealogy only use whole genome sequencing or targeted sequencing. So they're going to struggle much more to work with those mixtures. And Dr. Cady, as I said, is amazing and has a lot of experience working with mixtures. And, she, I shouldn't speak for her, but it's very challenging to do it with whole genome sequencing, and I assume also targeted sequencing. And
amazing, right? And if anyone else got lost there, I joined you. She lost me when she started going with genome sequencing. I missed that class in science, and so anyway. But from the chat, at Tucson Girl E9I, do you think the perp would have left DNA on the door handles or other areas when he took the light out of his mouth during the 40 minutes he was inside the house? Tucson Girl, absolutely great comment, great question. And that's part of the process of the crime scene. What a great crime scene detective will do and what a great investigator will do, they will look at areas of entrance and exit, and also areas of escape. What route did the perpetrator or tors use to exit and to escape the scene? Because along the escape route, that is another place you look for evidence. So especially something as minute as DNA. And you have to have a really, really keen eye and a really keen sense to know where on what and what objects and what it may have been left on. And so Tucson Girl, thank you so much for that. It was a great question. Mike.
Yeah, no, as you have DNA that is available, as you talk about low cards, principle. But you got to have a great eye. You got to be able to read the crime scene, figure out where the perp actually came in, where do they leave from, where else did they go? Is there an unguarded moment, like the viewer said, taking the flashlight out of your mouth? These are things that people will do. I had a perp one time break into an apartment from the fire escape window, and he had gloves in his pocket, but he took and he moved a vase with like this and put it down, and me and Augie and the fingerprint guy, the latent fingerprint guy, got 8 perfect fingerprints from off that. They identified the guy, locked him up. He had the gloves in his pocket, but in an unguarded moment, he didn't want to break anything, so he moved it with his hands. So you got to be lucky. You got to be sharp. You got to know what you're doing. You talked about this before. You have to have a person who can actually read the crime scene, see the sequence of events in their mind and recreate in their mind what actually happened so that they know where to go for the best sample of DNA. Because as Brian Enton and that Arizona professor talked about, you're going to need, even if it's saliva or something, you're going to need a quantity of it. And that's very
Mike, that's where going back to also that all of the contamination of this crime scene.
Right.
And in my opinion, I've been screaming about this the whole time we covered this case, is that this scene was not protected. When I saw video of people in the broadcast industry walking up to the door and closely videoing the blood on I was just like, who allowed that? And that is, you talk about investigation 101, that's policing 101. Protect the damn crime scene. And they didn't do that. And it also, the crime scene was released way too quickly. This Sheriff Nanos released the crime scene after 1 day. Once you release the crime scene, you can never get it back, because anything you recover after that goes to a court of law.
It's a question.
Some sharp attorney's going to rip it to shreds, and they're going to get all the evidence thrown out, because guess what? The scene was contaminated, as Mike referred to before. Locard's principle of exchange, right? Someone goes into a crime scene, brings something from the outside with them, and as they contaminate the crime scene, things from the crime scene get stuck on their shoes, their clothing, and they bring it out with them. That's Locard's principle of exchange. From the chat at James C 5022. So the mixed DNA must be a fingerprint mixed in blood. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. It could be any type. It could be sweat. It could be hairs. It could be fibers. It could be anything. Not necessarily. And just thank you, James, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
For folks that haven't studied criminal justice, a fingerprint is made from liquids and oils in your skin. So they're changeable. In other words, a fingerprint outside, if it gets too cold, can freeze. The fingerprint can actually freeze because it's made of liquids. So when crime scene techs lift fingerprints, they use tape, really highly. They first powders, they put powder all over it, right? A little fingerprint dust. And that brings the fingerprint up. And then they take a piece of tape and they put it on the dust and they lift the fingerprint and transfer it to a card. Fingerprints of crime scenes are not a great technology. And I think the NYPD's hit was, not good. Really, I can't even tell you exactly. For a whole year, they may get one or two for latent print hits. They get many latent print lifts, but the hits, very, very rare. And people are always under the assumption, they said, why don't they print that gun? Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons that fingerprints don't usually come off of guns, because when a gun is fired, it gets extremely hot, right? Didn't I tell you that the fingerprints are made of oils and liquids? So the heat dissipates and destroys the fingerprint. And that's one of the reasons that lifting fingerprints, and no one ever says that, because on CSI and all these TV shows, they lift them every single night. But the reality of it, it's not that common to lift fingerprints off of firearms. I hate to burst the bubble of the audience that's now they go like, he said they can't do that, So, but it happens to be the reality, Mike.
Yeah, and where you're gripping it, you may get a couple, maybe several partial fingerprints, but they may not even be enough to make an ID. They may be just an edge of your thumb, an edge of your index finger. So you may get a tiny bit, but it's really not enough to make an identification. And then if you have a parkerized finish, it may not, even if you have a good print, it may not, with the parkerization, it may not be good. Oils and dirt on the gun, as you said already, will destroy it. People put a gun in their pocket, wipe the fingerprint inadvertently. So therefore, if you get the fingerprint, the gun, the fingerprint may be messed up. So you're right. People don't realize that fingerprint, if you get a good one, that's 1 in 100 chance. That's an amazing thing to get. It's wonderful to have, but the odds of getting it are not very high.
From Simi Sharp, one of our great moderators, tips for this case, 1-800-CALL-FBI or fbi.gov/tips. Thank you, Simi Sharp. Absolutely. And James, thanks for doing the math, because neither me or Mike, that's why we became cops. We couldn't do math, He was 29 in 1993. He's referring to Rex Heuermann. So we know that Rex Heuermann did his first murder. At least it's the first one that they connected to him when he was 29 years old. Very scary, right? Very, very scary when you realize that how many cases we say, and not to go segue into another case, but James, thank you.
Yeah.
How many murders has he done that they don't even know about? I mean, that's what's really scary to me. This is from Fox News, and there's some interesting things in this report.
FBI's recovered new images from Nancy Guthrie's home cameras. Pictures from her front door, driveway, and backyard show people and cars in the days leading up to her disappearance. But they're still missing critical footage of the night she went missing. And sources say that's odd. And the FBI says they don't have any plans to release the new images. And they're still hunting for new leads. They've even reportedly questioned employees at a Mexican restaurant where Nancy taped a segment with Savannah for the Today Show months before she vanished.
What made you want to stay in Tucson and plant roots?
It's so wonderful. Just the air, the quality of life is laid back and gentle. Yeah, I like to watch the javelina eat my plants.
But the best thing about Tucson is coming home and
Yes.
seeing you guys. Should we raise a glass? Prickly Pear margarita? Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
Love you.
Love you.
Nancy's been missing for 6 weeks now. Police still don't have any updates. The sheriff, he's still talking, telling Tucson, lock your door.
We believe we know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted. But
You know something? We have been highly critical of the sheriff. He should just shut up. Do not say anything. Just shut up. He makes this case way more difficult by saying things that first of all, I don't think he could find a bad guy in a state prison, and he's there making statements about things he has no clue about, Mike.
Bill, his philosophical rantings about, well, it's possible that no. Don't go down roads like motive and opportunity and things like that. And for the future criminality of the suspect, don't go there. What are you going there? Law enforcement, you have to be practical. You have to be pragmatic. And to get philosophical in this instance about what may or may be if you want to be a teacher of philosophy, go right ahead, find a classroom. But if you want to be head of an agency in the middle of a huge case, don't go there. He just loves talking, and that is really bad. As you know, being cops, there are times to talk and there are times to be quiet, and you got to know when to be quiet.
Kenny Rogers said it best.
Yeah.
You got to know when to hold up, got to know when to fold up.
That's right.
Got to know when to walk away, got to know when to run, So he doesn't know either of those things or any of those things.
we're not 100% sure of that. And so it'd be silly to tell people, yeah, don't worry about it. You're not his target. Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. No, keep your wits about you.
So this was a targeted hit, but neighbors should be worried? It's been almost 2 months. We need more answers. The sheriff only has theories.
I think from day one, we had some strong beliefs about what happened, and those beliefs haven't diminished.
Do you believe it was a burglary gone wrong?
I'm not going to get into those theories. We have our beliefs. Everybody else has theirs.
So no updates, no suspects, no clue where Nancy is. Is the case cold? We hope not. We're still praying for Nancy and her safe return. Chris Swecker is a former FBI assistant director. So, Chris, there have been...
This FBI agent, Chris Swecker, is one of the best I've seen over, we've been doing this for a while. And he's always right on, and I like him. Let's listen to him.
Showing, I guess, an ability to extract more images from the home cameras from all over the place, but nothing new from that night. Is that weird?
Well, I think it depends on whether those are motion activated cameras, which I think they are. And if the FBI, and I think the FBI is in the lead here behind the scenes, if the FBI thought those videos could help solve this, help the public, help us solve the investigation, they would do that. But they're not releasing it. That tells me that they don't think it's all that relevant, or they're running it out themselves first. But every time the sheriff talks, I get less and less confidence about the investigation in this case.
What do you make about looking more closely at this Mexican restaurant?
I think it's a logical lead. We've been sort of play-by-playing this investigation since day one, and all these little things come out in dribs and drabs. It's hard to get excited about any one particular lead at this point, or any one particular overt investigative act, and that's what we're seeing now is, sparsely spaced out now, but overt investigative acts get noticed, and we make a lot out of it. But I just don't see that as being a breakthrough or representing a breakthrough in the case.
Is this case cold?
I don't know if we can call it cold, but I would call it lukewarm and cooling off pretty quickly. I think they're still going through a lot of data. The FBI analysts in the background are crunching through a lot of the data. I think the video is painstaking because it has to be real time, frame by frame review. And I think there's a lot of it to review. And I think there's a lot of stores in the area and outside the area looking for that merchandise that was purchased. And that has to be reviewed by analysts as well. 40,000 tips and leads. They're still chewing through all of that. So I still hold a lot of hope that something's going to match up. Some pieces of evidence are going to link together, and we'll get a solution to this case.
What's your read on the sheriff?
I think the sheriff's all over the place. He does have a reputation of being a curmudgeon, hard to get along with. Many of his own sheriff's deputies have left the department. A lot of experience has left the department, we've learned over the last few weeks. Not over the last few weeks, but even before this case happened, he demoted his pilot, the only person that could have got up in the air in the first hours of the kidnapping, and used the FLIR radar, the FLIR heat-seeking equipment to try to find someone in the desert. Other specialists were demoted as well, from what I understand. So, I'm gonna give him a D- on this case so far. I think the FBI is carrying the load in the background.
D-. Oh man, that's tough coming from you, Chris. We appreciate always your analysis. Again, we're just waiting for a safe return and praying for Nancy.
So, it's there. We took a little bit of criticism from some people for criticizing Chris Nanos, and as long as he's living and breathing and he's the sheriff, I'm going to keep criticizing him because he doesn't know what he's doing. He should not be running an investigation of this scope, size, or notoriety by no means. It's like giving matches to a kid.
Right.
I used to say that to some of my detectives. You shouldn't even be allowed to play with matches. But I believe it. I just believe he's done so much damage to this case. He's done so many things that you can't undo once you screw it up, and even just in crime scene management, he's ridiculous. When I saw those reporters stomping all over her property, I was just like, this is insane. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah. Bill, Vernon Gebert, who wrote the book Practical Homicide Investigation, the Bible for many years in homicide, and they used to teach homicide investigation with his book. He said in the book, I think the very first page, you only get one chance to do it, and you got to do it right. And if you don't, you're working from a less than pristine, crime scene. And I was just thinking, as you were talking earlier, Brian Hinton, remember, he and his cameraman were the ones who took the picture of the blood droplets on the front. Now, if they're standing there for a few minutes, they may have left DNA at that location, spittle, some finger from some, a hair off their head. They could have actually contaminated the crime scene, taken that picture. This isn't, this is something that could just throw off investigators. They're like, whose hair is this? And try to find his DNA, and that's a path, a rabbit hole that they have to go down and try to figure out whose DNA this belongs to. That's why making sure that crime scene, and we've seen, you and me and Phil, we've all seen crime scenes out in the middle of the street, out on the sidewalk, in a backyard, in an alleyway that are filthy. But when you get there, you got to keep it as pristine as you find it, and not allow this sort of, people walking around. Like, I just shake my head, you shake your head. We can't believe what was allowed to happen. And that may, unfortunately, have destroyed the crime scene enough to the point where we may not be able to solve this case in a more timely manner.
Oh, Mike, in part B to this case that no one that follows true crime and on the NYPD, we used to accuse the big bosses of this. The big bosses don't give a shit what happens to the case in court. The detectives do, because the detectives are the ones that raise their right hand and have to testify in court. And that's part B once there is an arrest. And they have to do everything correctly. And in this case, I mean, just watch the video. Watch what some of the supervisory decisions this chief made. I'd put him on the stand. I'd put him right on the stand if I was an attorney. And I believe they will make an arrest in this case. You can put that, you can say Professor Cannon, Sergeant Cannon, whatever you want to call me. He said that there will be an arrest in this case. I almost guarantee it. I feel like Joe Namath guaranteeing the win in Super Bowl 1968. But there will be an arrest in this case. And so the defense attorneys, as I said, I'd bring the sheriff in and put him on the stand. He's going to dribble on himself. He's not going to know what to say. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? I'm going to bring in your patrol gun. I'm going to bring in criminal justice manual that talks about crime scene management. Don't you think you violated? I mean, they could rip him to shreds. He did everything wrong. Closing the crime scene after one day, allowing people to go into the house. Did you have a log, a sign-in log for people coming in and out of that crime scene? How many people came in that crime scene? Why did you collect a DNA sample and send it to your private lab rather than to the FBI lab in Quantico? Wouldn't that have been more sound? All of those things. And just to me, I was cringeworthy to see the press stomping all over that crime scene. It was just ridiculous, Mike.
Yeah, it was mismanagement, and it may have destroyed evidence because it's difficult enough. And a viewer named Nancy Smith, I think, asked about DNA from a close family relative being in the house, making it difficult to identify them as a perpetrator. You're right. You have a case where you have to look at the family very closely. You have to collect DNA samples from the family. You have to interview them, and maybe you even polygraph. I would polygraph them too. And it's complicated enough. And to sit there and have it being more complicated by now having family go back in and walk around where maybe they hadn't walked before, the perpetrator, if it is a close family member, could actually help destroy the crime scene, intentionally destroy the crime scene. It was mismanaged from the start. And you don't always get, as Vernon Gebhardt would say, you don't always get that second chance. And if you don't get that second chance, excellent, reliable, worthy evidence may be lost. And once it's lost, it's gone.
I think his quote is that you only get one chance to do it right.
That's right.
I think that's his quote from Vernon Gebhardt. I think I read that book.
Yes, you did.
Cover to cover on numerous occasions. In fact, I've had Vernon Gebhardt on the show, and he's at lolo.lori1. Could the family ask for the FBI to solely take over the case? They could ask, but it's a protocol that the FBI is very reluctant to break because they like to try to keep peace with the local police department wherever they go in the United States, and they go all over the United States. If they established a precedent where they would come in and throw their weight around and just say, we're taking this case, believe me, they would get zero cooperation from the local law enforcement agency. Probably the FBI, for all intents and purposes, is running this investigation. And maybe even other powers, politicians, that dirty word, politician. Probably politicians in Tucson may have called the sheriff and say, back off. You're really doing some silly shit. Back off. Let the FBI run this. We'll still say you're running it. And that could happen. But no, they're not going to just allow the FBI to take the case over. That's not going to happen. And it's for good reason. I said it the other day, and if we have a big case in the NYPD, the FBI knows that they're going to take the back seat. The NYPD is first of all, the Detective Bureau, they have the slogan, the best detectives in the world. And I believe that they are, So it's not like the FBI is going to come in and go, no, you're not. In fact, we're going to get in a fist fight if you think you are, So, but small departments that don't have the experience, some of them would even welcome the FBI to take over the case because they don't have the experience. And we mention always the Idaho 4 case in Moscow, Idaho, the Brian Koberger, where he, murdered those 4 students. I'm sure the police there said, we want the FBI, help us, tell us, show us what to do, because they didn't have that type of experience. Not many jurisdictions or communities do to run a quadruple murder, a high profile quadruple murder of 4 students. So they would absolutely welcome the FBI in a case like that. One of the things that that was brought up, look, there's all kinds of DNA in Nancy Guthrie's house. And what Mike alluded to was that law enforcement should probably take samples. We used to call them elimination samples from every family member. People who had the permission and authority to be in that house, let's take their DNA and let's eliminate it, because it's surely we're going to come up with that. Do we want to do hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of tests on DNA that had permission and authority to be in that house? It's a little shaky because, a family member could be the suspect in this, right? We don't know, but definitely we used to do elimination fingerprints. Now they also do elimination DNA. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, you got to go with it. That's why DNA, back in like 30 years ago, they used to always use the term DNA fingerprinting, because it was a nod to the revolution that was in the early 1900s in criminal justice and police departments. That was actually the science of fingerprinting. And so now you have the successor to it, the fingerprint, the DNA fingerprint, and that is so important. And it's expensive. People, it's not like a fingerprint where you have these fingerprints on file and everything's digitized and you go through it. No, with the DNA sample, it's got to be sent to a lab. I would think probably each DNA sample that you ask a lab to run, it's going to cost you $10,000 to $20,000. And for a small department that doesn't have the resources, and then you've got, say, the FBI. Look at Moscow, Idaho. Their force may be 60 officers. There may be 3 detectives or 4 detectives and a sergeant. How are they going to have that expertise? How are they going to have that budget to do that sort of thing? You need the FBI or the state police at least to come in and help. And Chief Fry was excellent in that case because he welcomed them. He welcomed the state police. There was no issue about whether or not we need help. Absolutely, we do. And in this case, with the sheriff, he got off on the wrong foot with the FBI. And I don't think anybody can correct what has happened at this point. But you need their expertise, because whatever in small departments like this, whatever your homicide detectives, whatever experience they may have, they don't have that kind of experience as, say, an LAPD, NYPD, or the FBI. They don't have that experience. You got to welcome them. You need their contribution for terms of budget and everything else. You need them. And there's no way that you can run this kind of investigation and think you can do what they can do. You got to work with them.
Tammy J. Roseberry, just because not in CODIS does not negate not in NCIC. You're right, but so let's define what CODIS is. CODIS is the Combined DNA Indexing System. It's run by the FBI. There's 2 categories of DNA. One is convicted offender DNA. So to have the honor of having your DNA in there, you must be a convicted offender. And part 2 of the DNA is forensic DNA, which is unidentified DNA from a crime scene. So 2 types of DNA. NCIC, National Crime Information Center, you're sort of mixing apples and oranges there. The CODIS system has nothing to do with NCIC. NCIC would be fingerprints that are on the national level that they're on file. But Tammy J. Roseberry, thank you for your comment. Let me just touch upon this. This is another little snippet from Fox.
County Sheriff Chris Nanos just told NBC News that he believes Nancy was specifically targeted and is now warning the local community to be on high alert in case the perpetrator decides to strike again. And tonight, according to a new report, employees at Tucson's famous El Charro Cafe are being questioned by authorities since Nancy and Savannah once did a Today Show segment there together. As the investigation continues, law enforcement sources told Fox News today that more images have been recovered from cameras at Nancy's home, including cameras facing the backyard and the side of the house. Here now with expert analysis, the author of the new book, The Two FBIs, former FBI special agent and Fox News contributor Nicole Parker, along with Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. I want to start with you, Nicole. This report from NBC from Chris Nanos warning that they know that he believes with almost certainty that they know that she was targeted and are warning residents to be vigilant because they could be targeted as well. It seems kind of reckless to me to say that without explaining why you think she was targeted so that maybe other residents in the area might take better precaution.
Charlie, I agree with you. I mean, the sheriff came out in an interview and said that he believes that they know why he, meaning the offender, did this and that they believe it was targeted. But then in the next sentence, he says, but we're not 100% sure of that. And so for me as an investigator, that doesn't instill a lot of confidence. And I think that's part of the problem with this investigation. From day one, we've heard one statement and then retracted, and then you get contradicting statements. And you're always looking to law enforcement, to the lead investigator, to the sheriff in charge of the lead investigating agency to give you direction and to pronounce the facts. And I think that because there's been a track record of making statements and then going back on it, that statement doesn't really instill a lot of confidence. From what I understand and what we understand, there's no suspect. There is no known individual that they are looking at in particular. I'm not aware of any substantial leads at this point. And so I think it's extremely confusing. When you're in law enforcement, it's so important that you're very meticulous, that you speak with articulation, especially when you're communicating with the public on an investigation of this matter. And everyone is watching so closely. Right. Everyone wants to have an answer. We need answers. Nancy needs to be brought home. There needs to be closure. And I think that that just doesn't instill a lot of confidence, what he said.
Indeed. Greg, in the first hours and days and even weeks of this investigation, I was always a little squeamish to do too much armchair quarterbacking because, there's a life at stake here and you don't want to be nitpicking about things. But in retrospect, as we look back over the past weeks, it does make you kind of wonder if the sheriff's office hadn't kind of screwed up a lot of things here.
That's putting it lightly, Charlie. For example, saying that the abductor could strike again, that's not insightful. You could say that about any criminal. And now the sheriff has managed to alarm everybody without explaining. Frankly, I don't put much faith in Sheriff Nanos, his cryptic, cagey remarks. For example, refusing to disclose the theory of why the victim was targeted, what happened. That does not instill confidence. So count me as an extreme skeptic of Nanos's competence. He appears to have botched the case from the outset, failing to properly secure the crime scene, allowing unauthorized access, releasing the scene too early, then reversing course, and the biggest bungle of all, sending vital DNA evidence to a private lab in Florida, of all places, instead of the premier forensic lab of the FBI. That is mind-boggling. I mean, the Bureau has vast resources. Nanos could have tapped it. He didn't, perhaps because of his own ego. I think his handling of this case should be taught in classes on how not to manage a criminal investigation. On top of it, his communication skills are abysmal, confusing, contradictory statements. So this may not end well for the sheriff, but it's truly tragic for the Guthrie family. The mother's still missing after almost 6 weeks. Promising leads have gone nowhere. Right. But there's always hope for a sudden break in the case. But the longer it goes on, the harder that is, Charlie.
Yeah. So I sort of feel vindicated by other people that have come down harder on the sheriff than I even did. But because we noticed all of those things they just listed, all of the crime scenes, snafus, all of the contamination of the crime scene. And according to the reporter here, the biggest snafu of all was sending the DNA to a private lab and not to the FBI's lab. The comments that he makes, the message, we said from day one, messaging is abysmal. It's abysmal. And it's so important to have good messaging in these cases like this, because the press in a case like this is your ally. I used to say when I was on the NYPD, the press is your best friend and your worst enemy. And you use them. As a police department, use the press to help solve your case. But don't trust the press and don't give the press too much information. That was always my thoughts. Mike?
Yeah, the press is your gateway as a police commander. The press is your gateway to the public, because they'll disseminate the information that you need the public to know, maybe with the description, maybe with reward, maybe with other information to help people, help give you information and give you tips, and to help track down the perpetrator, because that's what it's all about. But we've seen this mismanagement of information. We saw it the very, very first day of the Idaho 4 case, when the mayor of Moscow said, yeah, we have 4 people who were slaughtered in their sleep with a knife, but we think it's targeted, but so we don't think there's any danger out to the public. We saw this with the Brown University, with the president saying, well, you know, we have a homicide here, but we don't think that is anybody has anything to worry about. What are you doing? You know, this is why stick with what you do best and try to stay away from the things that you don't do well and hire somebody to do them. And so I try to always say, you know, he's probably a good police officer, but he's a terrible spokesperson. I'll stick with that because I don't want to pile on. But yeah, the spokesperson part of it, leave it to somebody else. What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, you know, Mike, to tell you the truth, I don't think he's either. I don't think he's a good cop, I think he's a horrible spokesperson. So I hate to disagree with you, but I just think that if he was a good cop, he'd keep his mouth shut, and he can't. He just cannot keep his mouth shut, and he comes out with outrageous shit. And I'm just like, why is anyone allowed? He should walk around now with a piece of duct tape across his mouth. You know, whoever the mayor is should impose that sentence on him. Anyway, folks, this is what we got. This is the new stuff coming out, but it's nothing smoking gun. And some of the stuff I'm sure was just released maybe to hold off the press a little bit, especially the part about, you know, the Mexican restaurant, the part about the FBI potentially having more photographs of the potential perpetrators in this. But we haven't seen a photograph, have we? There hasn't been a photograph released from those alleged photographs that the FBI has. Folks, I'd just like to remind everyone that Police Off the Cuff podcast is sponsored by FanDuel on the Believe Network, and they help us pay our bills. Mike, your final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you very much to everybody in the chat. And Larry Talbot has thrown in some very good comments. Much appreciated, Mr. Talbot. Everybody should have faith that there won't be no stone left unturned. And please just try to take whatever Sheriff Nano says with a grain of salt. Go, and until you get a spokesperson from the FBI or the state attorney's office, disregard some of the crazy stuff that the sheriff is saying, because what he's saying sometimes, most of the time, doesn't really make any sense anyway.
100%. And so, folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in and on this Sunday afternoon. We did a little matinee today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Sunday. I'm Bill Cannon, and on behalf of myself and Professor Mike Geary, thank you for tuning in, and have a great day, and God bless.
Take care.
One episode just ain't enough.